screen. I have like 25 windows open, so give me a second. I'm gonna try to find the one that has the actual presentation. There we go. Alrighty. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. So as was mentioned earlier, coming on to talk about crafting a compelling narrative. And I think I broke that down into two sections. I forget the sections off the top of my head, but I think as we go through them, I'll see the headline in the section and I'll call it out as we go through them. But I think really, I think this is a really important topic to talk about, just because I think through Contrary, I've seen like hundreds of pitches. Through Roundtrip, the African accelerator that I work on, I've also seen a number of pitches. And so I think I just have seen a lot of mistakes that are easily avoidable when it comes to telling people what you're building. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of like creating this baby that you love and thinking that everyone has the same context that you do. And reality is that that's just not the case most of the time, or basically every time, right? And so really getting good at crafting a compelling narrative to get people to understand the concept that you're coming in from and what you're building is something that's super important for anyone who's building products, whether as a founder, pitching to investors, whether as someone who's leading product within a company internally, pitching to your engineers, pitching to your managers. I think just generally speaking, for anyone who builds products in whatever way, shape, or form, crafting this compelling narrative to pass across your sort of thought processes is super, super important. And so let's just jump into it. So first section, which I forgot, is proving demand. And so essentially that's all about you've created this product, you've ideated it, you've done all your processes to come up with a product. But I think the first thing you need to think about before even telling anyone about what you're building, whether it's an investor or engineers or designers who are going to work on your product, it's like, does anyone really want what I'm building? Is it something that is in demand? And I think as builders, there's just tendency to fall into that trap of like, oh, I'll build it and people will come. Which like, if you take anything away from this talk, like never do that. Like never assume that you're going to build something and people are going to use it, because frankly, the reality is that more often than not, you're going to spend weeks, months, however long building something, and you'll have this like little nice folder on your laptop and no one else sees it and never sees light of day, which we don't want because that's resources gone to waste. And so I think really one of the key things to think about when building products and communicating your product is before you build, prove that there's demand and make sure that people want what you're building. And when you've actually built it and you're actually communicating that narrative, make sure that you're properly communicating to people how you've proven that demand. And so jumping into that section. So really, I think when you think about proven demand, there's just no better way to do that than getting in the trenches. You gotta know your customer inside out. You have to know what they eat for breakfast, know what they do on their lunch break, like know their day-to-day. What is the problem that they face? How do they solve it today? What are their challenges with how they solve it? And I think you only get there through customer discovery. And I think when I talk about this, I think I'm also drawing from my experience where I mentioned I spent 4 years building DEI software, but like for 3 out of those 4 years while I was building DEI software at Tufts, I would just like sleep, read some research paper and be like, oh, this is what I got to build. And I would start building. And then like a few months later, I would talk to a couple people or I talk to someone and he'd be like, well, this is my experience. It's not quite necessarily what you've been thinking. And then by the time I would pivot, and it was just same story every couple months. I would build, we'd pivot, we'd build, we'd pivot. And so, I mean, obviously now I have like a great roster of projects that I've worked on that probably will never see light of day. But I think as someone who wanted to solve a core problem, that just was not the most optimal way to do things, because now I had all this energy, all this effort that went wasted. And so really, I think before building, obviously you have a core problem that you want to solve, but really you have to make sure that that's a real problem and that you have all your assumptions right. And the only way you do that is through customer discovery. And so how we transition from that whole narrative of spending about 2-3 years building stuff that no one really wanted to building stuff that we're seeing some increasing demand for was through customer discovery, right? So during my junior year at Tufts, or after my junior year at Tufts, so the summer before my senior year, that was summer of 2019, I believe. My team manager said, you know what, this can't keep happening. Like we gotta just stop building and actually go into the market and talk to people. And we spent that summer actually speaking to about 150 plus individuals, ranging from heads of people, heads of culture, heads of DEI, minority engineers, engineering managers, everyone who was in that ecosystem of the topic of diversity, equity, inclusion in tech, and just really just came in open-ended, right? And I think that's one of the key things to understand when you're doing customer discovery is don't be really careful about like passing on your thoughts onto someone else, because when you ask a leading question, more often than not, people will give you the answer that they know you want to hear, right? So being really careful about those leading questions and making sure that your questions are open-ended enough that you're actually getting unique and useful insights, I think is one of the most important takeaways from me from doing customer discovery. But yeah, you got to do your customer discovery to know exactly what people want and know exactly what to build for them. Because I think eventually, like, you do have to brainstorm and decide what to build, because like your customers can't really tell you what to build, right? It's like I think there's a saying somewhere on the interwebs around like your customers don't know what they want, you have to build what they want, or something along those lines. But really, the only way you can get to build what they want and develop that intuition for what they want is by understanding their problems, right? And so that's just me trying to rehash on that customer discovery point is, as much as you can, make sure you know the full experience of your potential customers as it relates to the problem, the experience that you are trying to solve. And then second of all, just thought leadership. And I think the reason that I say thought leadership is that there's no better way for you to know if everything that you think is bullshit than writing stuff and posting it on like Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook. If you follow or are followed by folks in that space, they'll call you out on your stuff. And so I think just being comfortable with the fact that you don't know what you don't know, and being open to talking about what you actually think you do know, opens you up to these comments, these insights, these I think really unique insights from folks who actually do know this stuff, whatever space you're working in. So for me, I'll use the DI space as an example. Like I try to just like post like, and this is something I've been doing over the past few months, is I just try to post like a couple hundred words in an article on like LinkedIn or Twitter, like once every like couple weeks, and I'll get a couple comments on it. I'll get some people who will comment on the actual post on Medium. I'll get folks who respond on like LinkedIn or Twitter directly. I'll get folks who send a DM. But the thing is, now I'm either getting confirmation for how I think about things, or I'm getting pushback on how I think about things. Either ways, I'm starting to develop this stronger intuition for the problem and what I need to build to solve it, right? So thought leadership isn't necessarily something that you do so that people can look at you and you can feel special, and people can say, oh my God, this person like knows all about the space. It's more so it's more so that you can let people actually either check you or confirm the things that you think. And so that's why I think thought leadership is important. I think finally, it's just really helpful as a way to condense your thoughts. Because I think for me, like after speaking to like 100-ish individuals over that summer, like I just had so many thoughts in my head. I had no, like I was being whiplashed left, right, center in terms of like the things I'd heard from folks. And so just sitting down and trying to just like throw it all on paper really helped me to decompress all the things I'd heard and really start to find those key threads, those key themes in things that I'd been told. And then finally, when it relates to getting in the trenches, I think it's just, you got to know your industry stats, right? It's like whether you're pitching to investors, whether you're pitching to engineers or designers, whoever you're pitching to, you got to know the industry stats like off the top of your head, right? Like if you woke me up in my sleep, I could pull out like 5, 6, 7 key industry stats about the DEI industry off the top of my head, like off the bat, like in my sleep, right? So these things are things that you need to be comfortable with, because again, I think all of this is just to say that like you really need to develop a strong intuition for what your customer needs. And the only way you can do that is by knowing both the qualitative and the quantitative side of things, right? So you can get the qualitative through the customer discovery, the thought leadership, and the quantitative comes in through the industry statistics, knowing what research has been done, knowing what things have been measured, and what data exists around the problem you're trying to solve. And that really is how you get that comprehensive understanding of the space that allows you to ideate and brainstorm in a manner that is as close to parallel as possible to the reality that your customers are actually facing. Because only then will you end up in a reality where you build something and it's close enough to the solution that needs to exist that you can start to iterate on it and improve on it, and make it better experience for users. But really, that's the only way you start to get towards that reality where you've built something that people actually want, which obviously is the holy grail of products that we're all striving towards. So continuing on that section, traction is king. Traction is always king. When you're trying to prove that what you're building needs to exist, like if you show traction, no one in their right mind will question you, right? People will question you when you're like, oh, well, I talked to this person and I think this is what needs to exist. But if you come through and say, here are data points that actually prove that what I'm building or what I'm trying to build, people actually want it, people will shut the hell up, right? It's like, if you have traction, no one questions you. And I think traction is king. It really is one of my key takeaways from building a company and from looking at people building companies and evaluating people who are building companies, is when you have traction, you basically have the gold standard for building a product, because that is like you saying, hey, I can start to feel the market pull for what I'm building. I can start to see the market demanding more of what I'm building. I can point to 10, 15, 20 folks who've seen what I built and who are using it, who are paying for it, who are maybe piloting, who are baiting, whatever it is. And so really hyper focusing on traction when you think about validating what you want to build is super important, regardless of who you're trying to communicate what your product to. And so some of the interesting ways that you can prove traction, some of the ones that I think are pretty interesting. I'll skip the first one for now and go back to, because like it's actually something that I like to talk about more in depth than the second two. But I think customers, pretty straightforward. If you build a product and you have people using it, done, boom, like there's no questions about it, right? It's like pretty straightforward. Like you have customers, you have traction, you have market pull, you're done, right? And then you can start to iterate on the product and improve the experience for customers and think about acquiring more customers and maybe opening up to a different customer vertical. But you have a first couple customers, you're on the right path. Like that's the obvious traction everyone wants to see. But sometimes I think getting your first customers isn't as straightforward as you would like, right? If you're building like, for example, a complex like health or biotech company, if you're building a complex like hardware company, sometimes it's not easy to get to the first product that you can then use to build that customer traction. And so another way that you can show traction is through letters of intent. Are there folks who have said, hey, this is a signed, like, I don't know, letter or notice that says, if you build this to XYZ extent, I will pay for a 3-month or 6-month subscription of what you're building. That's a strong enough, that's a pretty strong signal for pull from the market. So either way, either or, customers that are actually using the product, letters of intent from folks who've said, hey, if you build this, I will use this, are pretty good pulls for traction. And then I think third is something that I think has become more prevalent over the past year or so, especially from the investor perspective that I've been seeing. I think within the investor community, there's now this renewed understanding or increasing understanding of the power of community as a core driver to product adoption. And I think it's interesting what y'all are doing at Product Buds, where you're showing that there's a community that cares about this topic. And so if you built a product on top of that, then an investor wouldn't, like no investor in the right mind would be like, oh, who's going to use this, right? Because like there's an obvious answer. Oh, our community of folks who are in this thing that we built, we're now productizing and we have a product on top of this. And so they are obvious customers, right? And so it's something that I think about a lot for my company at Worksense as well, where we have this very social topic that we're building around, which is DEI and tech. And so if you can build a core community of, say, for example, early stage founders who are in some Slack channel that we manage, and the whole center of the community is around, we care about DEI and we want to scale DEI as we grow, but we don't know how to do it, right? If we went to an investor and said, hey, we have this community and now we've taken learnings from this community to build this product that helps early stage founders scale DEI, then like that's a very strong signal of pull, because even though they're not using the product, they've expressed demand for something like what we're building, right? And I think community is so special because it just kicks off all of these flywheels that aren't super obvious, right? So if you have a thriving community of folks, this is a sales flywheel that will exist once you're ready to launch a product. This is a community of folks that will give you product feedback that will ensure that, like we talked about previously, you build something that people want, right? This is a community that creates sticky adoption of a product, where if there's a competitor in the space who's building something similar, they're just less likely to jump ship to someone else's product, because like they have all their friends, they have all their buddies that they talk about DEI with in your community, and they just don't want to leave that alone, right? So community really as a core driver for product adoption is so special and so powerful. And so for me, whenever I see people taking a community-centric or community-first approach to building products, I get really excited, because from a theoretical standpoint, I see the value. And from a practical standpoint, it's also something I'm implementing in-house at Worksense. And so I've had probably like in the past like month, over 10 conversations with founders where I've said like, just go build community, like go build community, because like that'll answer all your questions, right? They'll ask me a question like, oh, how do I solve this? How do I put people want what I want? Go build a community and come back and then we'll talk, right? And so community is really powerful, I think, especially because it's just so easy to build community compared to like building a product, right? You can just like help people on LinkedIn, like, hey, dude, I'm doing XYZ, like I will give you access like workshops, like exactly like product pods, right? I'll give you access to workshops, and folks who care about this topic that you care about, come join my Slack channel, and we'll all be friends, and we'll hang out and talk about product all the time, right? People will join. Like that's such a very low activation, low energy thing for people to do, that like you can create a community so much more easier with little effort versus making a product. And the really special thing about community is that even if you build a community and a product you build on top of it is the wrong product, your community still persists, right? It never goes away. It's always there 24/7 every day until they decide to shut it down. And so regardless of what you build, it still exists and it's still relevant and people are still deriving value from it. Versus if you take my experience where I spent like 2-3 years building different products that didn't really need to exist, those products are just like shiny things on my laptop that I show to friends now, right? No one's ever going to use it really, I don't think. Whereas like with community, like everyone is deriving value from the community and it just drives so much value to products. So I will get off my community soapbox now and move on to the next section. But as you think about building and validating product, I think community is something that I think people need to think more strongly about and need to, I think community doesn't get enough respect right now, whereas I think it's so powerful. And I think the trend is changing, obviously. I think from the internal investor community or within investor spaces, community is starting to develop into its own like little thing that people see as a strong signal for products. And I actually have a friend of mine who raised like $2 million in her first round, literally. And all she has is like this thriving community of like, I think 50,000 folks who are sharing the same passion. And like they have really high DAUs, really high MAUs, and they're going to build a product around it. But like the product is still in development. But like they raise money from investors. That's pretty wild, right? Not having a product and raising money, like that's almost unheard of if you're not like a serial founder. And so I think that just speaks to how much people are starting to see that community is valuable as a core driver for everything product related. And so for people who are thinking about product, I think it's important to think about community as something that you build in tandem with product, because that just helps answer so many questions down the line. So getting off my soapbox officially now. All right, second section that I want to talk about was basically how to communicate a proven demand, right? So we've talked about all these different ways to actually prove demand and to validate demand. And so now the question is, well, if I have validated demand, if I don't know, done the work and proven to myself that demand actually exists, how do I communicate that to folks? I think this is actually a really important one, because I think founders, I think product builders also fall into this really unfortunate trap where, like I mentioned earlier, they've built this baby, they have all the context, they know everything, and they think that everyone gets it just because they get it. But that's just never really the case. And so communication is such an important thing to understand. And I think it's interesting the way communicating a product and demand for product works, because it's almost like a muscle that you build over time, right? Like if you woke me up in my sleep, I could like jump into a pitch for my company like that. Like I don't need to prep. Like I have my slides, I know it inside out. But I have videos of like my first couple pitches that I did, and like it's like stuff I watch, and I need to humble myself, like because like it does not look great, right? And so it's like a muscle you need to develop, because like you do it over time and you just learn what works, what the positives were, what the negatives were, and you can just fine tune how you communicate. But I think communication is such an important piece of building a product, because whether you're a PM at a company and you're trying to communicate what you're building to engineers and designers, or you're a founder who's trying to communicate your MVP to an investor or your first couple of customers, it's what gets you the check mark that you need to move forward with building that product, right? So communication is super important. So that being said, I'm gonna jump right into it. So I think the first question you gotta answer is like, why? Like, why should I care? Why is this problem important? Why is this product relevant? And I think people answer the why internally, but don't know how to answer the why externally. And I think answering the why externally is as, if not more important than answering that why internally. And I think how you answer this question is dependent on how you validated all this stuff, like we mentioned, whether it's through sales or customers, whether it's through LOIs, whether it's community. Why is this a problem that needs to be solved? And that's something you need to communicate immediately. Like first, like out the gate, like this is what you need to talk about. Like, hey, my name is Timi, I'm building ABC, and this is why this problem is relevant, right? For me, I jump into like my personal story and industry statistics about how much money has been lost because of the problem. For someone else, it could be, hey, I built this community and everyone just kept struggling to do ABC, and that's why you built XYZ. right? But you really need to hone in on why you are solving this problem. Why is this problem important? Are people losing money because of this problem? Are people losing sleep? Are people losing time? Why do you need to solve this problem? Because like there are so many problems around the world. Well, there's just some problems that don't really need to be solved, right? If the problem you're solving is, oh, I don't want to get up to go grab like, I don't know, a water from my fridge. I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that. That's not really a pressing problem. Versus a problem where like Uber, for example, it's like I want to get from point A to point B, and I just can't do that seamlessly. Like that is a very like punchy problem that needs to be solved. And there's so many statistics that you can point to as to why that's a problem, because you can talk about the time wasted when you want to hail a cab, or how many cars are in your area that are dormant, or how many people have cars in their driveway when they're at home, and they could be making money off of those cars by like driving for Uber. But really just getting good at communicating why this problem is a problem that needs to be solved is super important, because frankly, there are some problems that just don't need to be solved because they're just not pressing enough. Um, and so let's assume you've validated why this problem needs to be solved. You've said, hey, qualitatively, I've spoken to folks and here's the problems that they've identified. And quantitatively, I've looked at market research and it all points to this being a massive problem for a number of people. Then the question becomes, okay, I get your problem, but why is this the product to solve that problem? And again, how you get there is customer discovery. You got to live, breathe, and eat your customers. Like you got to know why this product is what solves a problem. So I'll use myself as a case study, right? When we talk to investors about Worksense and they ask why this product, we say, hey, like people are using like 5-6 different HR tools to manage different stages of the talent life cycle. And every product that exists right now focuses on one stage of life cycle. So they need something that consolidates all their data across all of these HR tools that they use underneath one platform and gives them comprehensive insights versus like disjointed insights across like singular verticals of the talent lifecycle. That's like pretty powerful in my opinion, right? It communicates how they're solving this problem right now, why the way they're solving this problem right now doesn't work, and how their current behavior primes them to need a product like what we are building, right? Their current behavior is one such that like they're using one HR tool for payroll, another one for recruiting, another for compensation. And we're not trying to change their behavior. We're trying to work with their current behavior. And I think that's an important takeaway is as we build product, it's so hard to change human behavior. Like as humans, where we have such just this like really high tendency to repeat behavior. And so as much as you can when you're building product, think about how you can work with current behavior versus building a product that actually requires people to change behavior, because the activation energy required to actually make people change the behavior is so high that most of the times it's just not worth it. And you find that in your onboarding process for your product, you just have so many drop-offs because you're requiring people to change their behavior. And so as much as you can, figure out what the behavior is. And this goes back again to one of the earlier points is customer discovery. You got to just know what their behavior is before you can intuitively know how to build around that behavior in a way that optimizes that current behavior, right? So that's an important thing to answer when you think about why is this the product to solve the problem? How does this compare to what currently exists that they're using? How does this currently compare to their existing processes? And I think a third why that I think people just don't answer most of the time that needs to be answered is why you. Like, I get this is a problem. I get this is the right product, but why are you the one to build this? Like, what industry expertise do you have? What connects you to this problem? Because I think, frankly, if you don't have a salient reason for why you're the one doing that product, when the going gets hard, you'll just say fuck it and you just leave the product and you just stop building, right? But the thing is, if you have some internal motivator for solving that problem, then you're more likely to slog it out when it gets hard. And frankly, the truth is, whether or not you want to hear this, it is hard as hell, right? Like building a product is really hard. And so you need to build things that you have a reason for building, whether it's like a problem that you personally experience, whether it's something that a family member experienced, it needs to be something, and I think this might be a hot take, but I just think people who build products need to build products that are personal to them, because that's how you really build that's how you generate the sort of, I guess the word I'm looking for here is like the resilience, exactly, just to sort of stay and continue chugging along when the going gets hard as it relates to product adoption, right? And so for me, like my story is like I went to my first hackathon at like 17 as a high school senior, and I was like the only Black kid there, and I was like, holy shit, this is wild! Like, what is going on, right? And like I have a little brother who like codes all the time now, and like he's also a Black kid, obviously. And so like all my friends from like college are also working in tech, right? So this whole idea of like the experiences of minorities in the workplace is so personal to me that I become just deeply passionate about the problem that like no matter what happens, I just literally like keep taking punches and just like keep walking, right? And so that's my why in terms of like why am I the one to build this process? Because I have experienced it personally. I have people I care a lot about who experiences it personally, and whether or not I build this product, I will continue seeing this problem on a day-to-day basis. And so I just can't think about doing anything else but solve this problem. And so I think really when you're, and I think this is probably more important when you're communicating to investors about a product you built, it's investors want to see why you, because frankly, investors see hundreds of pitch decks like every hour. Like everyone pitches to investors every other second. And so odds are where you're pitching, they've probably seen before. Right? And that's like the reality of the situation. Is like no one, like at this point, like tech has been around for so long that it's so hard to build anything that's like super novel. If it's not like deep tech, if it's software, they've probably seen it. Um, and so really, especially in the early stages, what investors are betting on is the ability of the founder to stay with the product even when it gets hard, and to stay with the problem and to pivot as necessary and to make product adjustments and to just really stay with what they're building. And so really, why you, I think, is underrated as a question that product builders need to answer. Because I think a lot of the times you focus on like engineering and design, kind of making something cool that people want and talking to customers, but you don't really look internally and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I the one to do this? And I think that's a question that if you can answer properly, will help your product development process, because when it gets tough, when it gets hard, you'll be able to sort of pull through. All right, let's see. There we go. So content, right? So communicating products, I think one of my pet peeves is seeing people like throw on like a bunch of text and then like also start talking and like expect me to like get both. And I'm like, dude, I have like the one brain and like I only use like what 10% of it, if even, right? So like cut me some slack. I can't like I can't jump back and forth between like written words on a deck and like someone who's speaking at like, I don't know, 500 words per minute. And I think you can see with the deck I'm presenting right now, where it's like there's a lot of very empty but powerful spaces, if that makes sense, right? Like when you're building decks to communicate with the folks, you want to make sure that you're able to connect with them, and that's challenging to do when you're shuffling between like them reading and them listening, right? You want to make sure they can, you want to prioritize them listening to you, but also have supporting like content that they can just like use to get like a sense of what you're trying to say, right? So for example, content, text is a devil, imagery is king, KISS. Pretty obvious, pretty straightforward. Like you can spend like basically 95% of the time listening to me. And so text is a devil. I think the less text you have on your decks, on whatever material you need to present, the better in any situation, in any case. It's always better. And I think again, that's another muscle that you build really where you have to get really good at that intuition for what is the most important point that I want to pass across here, and how can I just like leave every other thing out of it. Because like again, this is your baby. You want to show all the details. You want to show all the nice, kooky, crazy like bells and whistles that you've added to the product. But that's not why anyone will decide whether to check off on the product you built or to invest in the product you built, right? It's all about like really the macro analysis and the macro perspective that you're bringing into the product. And I think that's what's important. And you obviously have Q&A after the conversation. People will have questions in between, and you can use those times as a way to I guess answer questions or deal with uncertainties or questions that people have. But really, in presenting materials, text is a devil. I hate text. Investors hate text. People who are signing up on products probably hate text, because like frankly, we see so many people pitching products every day that like when you bring a product page that requires me to sit down and like think about my college days by reading a thesis on like a deck, I just start to feel you're already setting yourself up for failure, because I'm already mad at you, right? It's like you're making me do all this work to understand what you're saying. Like, come on now. And so again, just rehashing, text is devil, imagery is king, right? Getting good at using images to pass across what you're trying to say, getting good at using images that have the context of the text that they're trying to represent, I think is super important, super powerful, and something that frankly most people don't do very well at. And so you find that like, I mean, even when I pitch, like a feedback I get consistently is, holy shit, your deck is so nice, so clean. And I think that just already sets you apart from everyone else who's coming into pitches investors, where investors are already like, they're like, oh, this person can make a nice deck. Okay, what do you have to offer, right? They're already primed to listen to you by virtue of just you coming in and having like this really simple, easy, straightforward like material that they don't have to spend too much time trying to understand. And the final point is KSS, keep it simple, stupid. Like people, again, love to overcomplicate these pitches because they want everyone to see the bells and whistles. But again, people aren't going to invest in your product or decide to sign up on your product because of all the nice bells and whistles. They'll decide to sign off or decide to invest because of the macro perspective that you bring in. How are you building? Why are you building? What are you building largely? And how did you come to these conclusions versus like, oh, I have this really cool feature that lets you do A, B, C, and X, Y, Z. And I want to make sure that you know all the great features that like I have in my product. No one cares. Like what good, great, wonderful. Like even the best products pivot, even the best products change stuff, right? So no one's really like coming in to see like every single thing that you built into your product. What they're coming in to see is what are the macro perspectives, what are the macro thought processes that went into the product decisions, and from a high level, what are you building, period, right? Like for us, like we don't come in, like when we pitch our products, like we say, hey, building software that streamlines the processes for tracking, mitigating biases across your talent lifecycle. We don't talk about all our integrations. We don't talk about how we can benchmark. We don't talk about how you can jump between like analysis. We don't talk about how you can like get visibility and dive deep into employee stats and data. We don't talk about all that because frankly, if they want to know, they'll ask. If they have questions about the product, they'll ask. But if you're already complicating stuff for them from the get-go, then they won't even be able to wrap their heads or their minds around the general stuff that you're building in the first place. And that just like is a lose-lose for everyone involved, right? Because now they don't know what you're building. Now you can't get what you want from them. And now you have this, again, product that sits in a folder in your laptop that no one ever sees, right? So really focus on making sure that they understand at its core from a high level what you're building and what you're trying to achieve or what you've built, the value you're trying to provide. And then any other thing that they want to know, they'll ask you. And I think that's what people don't understand is like people will ask questions if they have questions. You don't need to throw all the information at them at once. Like high level, and if I have certainties, if I have any questions, I will let you know. And then you can dive into the details. But if you kick off with like details, that overcomplicates it for me and for anyone else who's reading a product, and they just never get their head around what you're actually trying to build. And if you think about pitching to an investor or pitching to someone who signs up for your product, if they don't understand what you're trying to build, I think the answer there is already pretty obvious in terms of what they're going to say about what you built, right? It's like, I don't get it. I don't think it's the point. Goodbye, right? That's it. And that's obviously not what we want. So rehashing that point, keep it simple. As simple is good. The simpler you can get, the better. Because I think people just mostly don't have the context. People are inundated with information on a day-to-day basis. And so the simpler you can get for them, the better it is for you and them eventually. And I think from a product perspective, I think, and this is probably more related to my investor hat. I guess it's also related to like building products internally within companies. But I think when you build a product, it's important to talk about what you're building now, but it's also important to talk about what it's leading to. So for us at Worksense, we talk about how our grand vision is to build this like centralized ecosystem for DEI tools of DEI tools for people leaders. And I think that's important because people want to know what your product is leading towards and why you're starting where you're starting and how that lends itself to the grander vision. And so when you're building product, I think it's always important to talk about what is the larger end goal here from like, what am I really trying to achieve? And how does this product get me to that end goal of what I'm trying to achieve, right? Because I think frankly, if you're building the product that is your end goal at the start, then like you got to relax because like you're starting off too complex, right? It's like you got to build the MVP, you got to work your way towards like the end goal, you got to learn from customers along the way and iterate along the way to get to an end goal of a product that people really want. And so typically, if you're doing things the right way, what you've built initially that you're showing to investors or showing to someone that's going to sign up on a product and what you actually want to build as your grand vision are probably fairly different in terms of functionality, in terms of value add, in terms of capability. The grand vision is typically significantly larger or more than like your initial product, right? But I think it's important when you communicate to investors or to whoever is signing up on your product what your grand vision is, because they need to understand this is what this person has built and here's what it can do, but here's what they really want to do, right? And investors particularly are investing not because of your product that you're coming to pitch, because frankly, like odds are you probably pivot like the second you walk out the door. But really what they want to see is what are you really trying to solve? Because that's what they're investing in. They're investing in you as an individual and how your product development process works and the product that you want, the problem that you want to solve. And that problem really is something that I don't see a lot of people talk about in terms of like pitching to investors in terms of like the grand vision. As people come in, they say, hey, I'm building like Uber for I don't know, dining experiences. Here's my traction. Here's my team. Done. Please give me your money. But like investing is like a 7 to 10 year relationship, right? So over that time span, I fully expect that like you pivot, you improve product, because if you're doing things the right way, you should, right? If you're talking to customers, if you're in the trenches, you should be iterating on a product. Your product should have changes here and there, whether minor or major. Your product should pivot whether minor or major. And that really is what investors want to see, is that grand vision, because that's what they're investing in the early stages. And so secondly, how will you win? Like I mentioned, right, it's very naive to think that you're building something that no one else has thought about building, or that no one else has built, right? Like there will always be competition, there will always be alternatives, even if your alternative isn't the actual product. So for us, we have a bunch of competitors. One of our competitors is Excel. Like people do what we're trying to do in Excel spreadsheets. Like that's a valid competitor. And so talking about like how you win against your competitors. So for example, with us, like Excel is tedious. Once you have 100+ employees, doing what we're trying to do in Excel is hell. And essentially that's our business case for why we win against a tool like Excel. And so for anyone who's communicating a product to an investor or to someone who's signing up on your product, you need to really talk about why you think you'll win. And I think when people talk about why they think they'll win, there's just tendency, especially from a product mindset, to talk about features and say, oh, we integrate with like PayPal and that's why we'll win, is because we have this cool integration or we have this cool feature. That's bullshit. Like anyone can build an integration, anyone can build a feature. Like software, the barrier to software is the lowest it's ever been, and it's so low right now. Anyone can go and build a product in like a week. Anyone can go build a feature in like a couple of days, right? So when you talk about how you win and how you're differentiated from other products in that space, it needs to come from a philosophy. So for us, like when we say why do we win, we say we're winning because we are literally the only tool that's looking at biases across the talent life cycle. Right, that's a philosophy that we're coming in where we're saying we think that the way other tools have focused on the problem is disjointed, where they're looking at particular nodes of the talent life cycle and focusing on those. And we think that there needs to be consolidated insights into what's going on with employees internally within companies. And that's why we'll win, is because companies will want to use us because we're giving full visibility versus focusing on one node of the talent lifecycle and having to buy a bunch of different tools for each node of that lifecycle, right? So it's more of a philosophy and how we think. It's almost like, you would think about it, it's almost like you have this version of the future that you think should exist, and you have to communicate why your version of the future is the version of the future that will actually exist, right? And so for us, like our vision for the future is like, oh, people want one software that lets them understand what's going on with their talent across the board, across all the processes. And why we think that'll win, or why we think that's a future that will exist, because we can point to a bunch of market trends, we can point to industry analysis, we can point to conversations, we can point to articles that talk about this kind of stuff, right? So how you win should be more from a sort of philosophical mindset and a market positioning mindset versus like a bunch of list of features. And then you have like the nice like 4x4 grid and you have the check marks and the X's and say, oh, we have this feature and like no one else has this feature and that's how we'll win. Like that's bullshit. Like that's not a viable competitive or a viable way to think about competition while you win in the space. And finally, from a long-term perspective, it's like exit opportunities. Like what happens to this product, this company that you built in the next 5-6 years? Like, are you trying to go public, IPO? Are you trying to get acquired? If you're trying to get acquired, like who acquires you? What's the time horizon for that? So pretty straightforward, not too complex. I think this is more relevant for people building products that they want to turn into a company versus people building product internally. Because obviously, if you're building a product internally at a company, the extra opportunity there is it gets integrated into the larger product or the market product. But for people building products for startup companies, investors want to see that. And obviously, again, no one's going to like be mad at you if like what you say doesn't end up being true eventually. They just want to know that like you're being thoughtful about it and you're thinking about it and you know that this is something that is relevant to building a company. Are there people who are there larger incumbents who maybe are thinking about what you're building who might be interested in buying you out? Do you want to IPO? Do you see this as an opportunity to IPO or go public? And I think it's important both for the investor and also for the founder or person who's building the company, because you want to make sure that you're mission aligned with who's investing in your company, right? If you're building a company that you expect to IPO in like 10 to 12 years, but then your investor wants you to exit in like 5-6, then like when you're not ready to exit, they're going to start pressuring you to exit. And that's just not a great experience for anyone being pressured by your investors. So you want to make sure that your mission and value aligned with your investors. And that only happens with communication and being and having a strong understanding of how you actually want the exit of the company to go about. So with that, I will open up for Q&A. And I know I talk relatively fast, so hopefully you're able to pick up on all of that, and this was helpful for you all.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much, Timi. That was,
Of course.
yeah,
No,
you
stop
definitely
sharing.
You're speaking truth bombs. A lot to follow,
I'm
but
happy that that's the thoughts. And I see Joel in here. How's it going, Joel?
I'm chilling, bro. How are you?
Good, good. I know we just hopped off the Envision call, so
Yeah.
nice to see a familiar face.
all right, for sure. Meanwhile, I'm gonna share my screen real quick so that we can go into a time of Q&A. We have about, let's see, about 10 minutes left. Can you see my blue screen right here?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So we're just gonna go with the top voted questions. This is based off the community aspect that you were talking about earlier, but how do you build a community without associating it with the product? Do you build it around the concept? Can you provide some practical steps to start?
Yeah, so I think in terms of building a community without associating with the product, I think it all goes back to building something that people want. If you're building something that's solving for a real problem, then there's people who want to talk to other people who are experiencing that problem, right? So using product buzz as a case study, for example, like people want to break into products, they don't know what to do to break into product, and there's hundreds of folks who are experiencing that problem, right? And so now there's a community around that shared problem of I want to break into product, but I don't necessarily have the resources to do that. And so I think you don't necessarily have to create a product or associated product around a community. It's nice when a product is driven by community, but communities can exist and do exist without product. And so I think it's all about like, are you solving, and community is similar to product in that like the community will exist and will thrive as long as you're solving a real problem that multiple people do have. So I think that really is what I recommend is you don't have to build it on a concept, you need to build it on a problem. And in terms of practical steps to start one, I mean, I think just like finding folks, and this happened. So for me, I've done this through like customer discovery, where like people who I just talked to who are experiencing the same problem, like, oh, would you be down to be a part of a community that's like for folks who are experiencing the same problem? And I think that's like a great way to sort of jump into building that community. And there's a bunch of different like articles that I think I rely on whenever I have community questions, so I can pass along to the team and they can share that with you all.
That's awesome, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll go into the next one. The next upvoted. What's the trickiest question you've gotten from an investor after pitching an idea to them?
That's a good question. Let me think for a second. I think the trickiest one I got because I wasn't ready was what I wanted to use the money for. So I think obviously it's like you want to hire a bunch of people and you know from a high level what you want to do. But I think when they start getting into like the details and like, oh, how many engineers you want to hire and how many designers you want to hire and what roles you want to hire, I'm like, I don't know, I just want some money so I can go hire people that I need to hire. So for me, I think that was tricky just because I didn't have an answer off the top of my head. But I do think that it was an important question for you to think about, and one that I do think a lot more about in terms of like, okay, who is my first key hire? Why am I hiring that person? Why is it the first key hire? And so I think for me, that was like an interesting question, a tricky question, just because like I just didn't expect it, but it's one that's been helpful so far now.
I feel that when they ask a question and you don't know the answer, you start flipping on the spot.
Exactly.
For sure. All right, next one. Oh, it's the trickiest. Oh, no, we've done this. Did I just take one out? Uh-oh. All right, we'll move on to the next one. How do you get your pitch audience to buy into your product if they're not in your target users?
Yeah, I think it's just making a compelling case for why that product needs to exist, right? And that all like you can't argue in statistics, right? So for me, it's like I come in and I say, hey, buddy, like tech companies are losing $16 billion a year in unfairly related turnover. Like, oh, word, like you're not gonna question me when I say that because like this is like industry backed statistics, right? So when you want to get a pitch on to buy into your product when you're not your target users, you just need to lean into hard quantitative metrics for why this product needs to exist. Because at that point, qualitative just won't be strong enough if they're not bought in. And how you buy them is just like showing the hard data because you can't argue against data.
That's a good point. All right, next, moving on to the next question by Femina on top. If your product has a lot of competitors in the market, how do you find the distinguishing factor and deliver it in the pitch?
So I think the problem here is the angle that this is coming from. So I don't think you should build a product and then say, oh, well, who's building something like this and how do I compete? I think the reverse should be the case. You should know what everyone else is building and then understand what they're doing or what they're not doing that people want. And that's how you then find what to build. And by doing that, now you've built something that you fully understand how it differentiates from what everyone else is building because of that process of product development, right? It's like instead of going from this like product first mentality where you build and then you figure out where you fit into the marketplace, you need to come in from this sort of more customer centric mentality where you understand what everyone else is using, you understand who's building what they're using, and you understand the customer's challenges with what currently exists in the market. And so when you build, you know exactly what you're building, what you've built, and how it compares and differs to current solutions that your customers currently use.
Okay, for sure. Moving on to the next question with Amish. Would you be able to share a successful pitch deck you've prepared for a product pitch? If you could, we can like email them out
Yeah,
afterwards.
so I'll say I'm less down to share my personal company pitch, but what I can do is there's this really good what's the word here? This is really good just a bunch of decks that successful companies have basically raised money with in the early stages. And I think it's very interesting to see like a product like Airbnb or like Uber when they were first starting out and launching and trying to raise their first couple $100,000 or $1 million, because that's really helpful in terms of, and I think it's been helpful for me as well, even when it comes to actually creating a compelling pitch or deck. And so I can share a link to that. Actually, a buddy of mine is who put me on, so I can just ping her and ask for that link, and I'll send it out, pass it across to y'all.
That's amazing. I think, yeah, that'll be really, really helpful. For
I think that's even more helpful because, like, I mean, Airbnb is probably one that you want to take notes from versus like me. Like, I barely raise any money. I'm still early stage, right? So like, whatever I say, you can take with a grain of salt versus like Airbnb, who like pretty much like is basically successful at this point.
For sure. How do you get your pitch audience to buy into your product if they're not the target users?
Again, it's hard stats, hard data. You can't argue with data.
With this one thing, yeah. Okay, going back to imagery is king. What are your tips on personalizing the imagery and pitches to convey your message and your product?
Yes, I mean, what I do is I know that there's schools of thought that talk about like hiring a designer and paying like a couple $100 to get a designer to build a deck. I don't do that because, like, frankly, I think, and I'm not subscribed to that philosophy, because I think your deck should change, your deck should evolve. And if you have to hire a designer every time your deck evolves, that's just a lot of money going down the drain. And if you're like me and you're strapped for cash in the early days, that's not what you want. So for me, what's worked well for me is I've gotten really good at finding like icons on Google. Like, I have a whole system. Like, I'll go on Google, I'll like type in a keyword, and it's also like you have to have a good intuition for SEO and like the kind of image you want to find in the first place. I'll go on Google, and even for this deck, like all the icons I use for this presentation, I just pulled off of Google this afternoon. Like frankly, like that's exactly what I did. And so if you go on Google and you like click like if you type in a couple words and you add icon to the end, and you go to images, then you go to tools. And if you go to tools, you can go to color and click transparent. And so that way, whenever you click on an image and it loads, it'll load a version of that image that doesn't have a background. And so when you then put it on a deck, it looks like it's like, oh, some like $200 designer or a couple $100 that you paid a designer to make, whereas it's like you just pulled off of Google. So that's my strategy for making nice looking decks.
For sure. For the sake of time, we'll do one more question here. What
Sounds
metrics are stakeholders looking in these product pitches while you're pitching to them?
Yeah, so I think the metrics that you want to point out to are metrics that can help to capture the scale of the problem. Again, right? So for me, it's like I talk about like $16 billion being lost every year. Like that's a lot of money, right? So that points to a problem that a lot of people are facing when it comes to figuring out unfairness internally within their companies, right? So when you think about metrics that stakeholders are looking for in product pitches, it's more so metrics and statistics that point towards the scale of the problem and how much money has been lost by people who experience the problem, how much time is being lost, just any kind of statistics and data points you can find that points to the scale of the problem, I think is really powerful in getting people bought in and getting people to understand why your product needs to exist. And just generally speaking, getting people to understand why you're building what you're building.
For sure. All right, with that, we're gonna stop the Q&A session over here. What did everyone think of that? That was, this is a great hour of just jam-packed information with Timi just giving all of his passion to the rest of us. Just hear it for Timi in the chat to see what everyone thought of the presentation so far. But
yeah,
thank you so much
for all the love, everyone. Appreciate it.
As always, if you enjoyed that and you took notes and you got your learnings and takeaways, be sure to post it on LinkedIn. Tag Timi, tag the Product Buds team, and we'll make sure to engage with the post itself. But with that, yeah, thank you again, Timi. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.